During the 19th and early 20th centuries, the European powers dominated most of the world. There was the mighty British Empire, on which the sun never set, and the French Empire, its strongest colonial competitor. Then there was Germany, the rapidly industrializing modern power that's practically single-handedly maintained the delicate balance of power in Europe, aided only by the Austrians. And the old empire, Russia, which maintained its strength by size alone, and the older empire, now in decline, the Ottoman Empire. And, oddly, often counted among these, the Kingdom of Italy. Italy was considered one of the great powers, but they were only won by the insistence of the others. Their unification was a miracle. Prior to Napoleon, the peninsula was always divided between dozens of small city-states and empires, and even 50 years prior to 1900, Italy didn't look like this. It looked like this. A total mess that hadn't been unified since Byzantium. It was conquered gradually by Sardinia-Piedmont in the 19th century after a brief period of unification as a French puppet state during the Napoleonic Wars. They managed to form a unified state, but the industrial north clashed constantly with the agricultural south, and the new country remained under the thumb of, variably, France or Austria. For instance, a French guard held Rome until 1870, and the Italians were only able to take the area when the Papal Guard left to go fight the Prussians. They rose in influence, but only due to their relative neutrality in the quarrels of the other powers. Nonetheless, when the European powers met to partition Africa, Italy was invited to the conference. And they did gain colonies. However, out of all the nations who gained territory, the only country who got less out of it was Spain, whose territories were at least close to home and culturally linked to them. Italy got Eritrea and Somaliland. Even tiny Belgium got way more land than them. They also wanted a protectorate over the Beylik of Tunis that was already closely linked to Italy, but the French beat them to the punch in what the Italians literally called the Slap of Tunis, blocking the Italians from taking it over and controlling their own territorial waters. It only makes sense at this point that when in 1882 Germany and Austria offered Italy a place in their dual alliance, they took it. They formed a formidable bloc that effectively severed the mighty Franco-Russian alliance in two. Or it would have been formidable had it not been essentially discarded by the Italians shortly after by secretly allying with the French. With diplomacy apparently suitably out of the way for the moment, the Italians decided they wanted to make up for the lack of gains in the scramble for Africa. They first targeted Abyssinia, one of the few remaining states in Africa, seen as illegitimate by most of the other powers. It was a guaranteed Italian victory, and yet, despite not having any aid from any other countries, the Abyssinians managed to overrun and repel the Italian invasion. The Italian forces found themselves completely humiliated by the Battle of Adwa, which secured the independence and recognition for the Abyssinian Empire and completely embarrassed Italy. To make up for this, they looked elsewhere. Italy attacked the Ottoman Empire in 1911, seizing their North African territory in what is now Libya to cover the loss of Tunis. The resulting war lasted right up until October 1912, when the Balkan states of Bulgaria, Serbia, Montenegro, and Greece attacked the Ottomans as well, opportunistically riding on the wave of disorder in the empire that resulted from the war in Libya. This too brought Italy closer to the Entente, as Russia had long considered themselves the protector of the Balkan Orthodox Slavs that Italy had just indirectly aided in liberating. Then, in 1914, the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, Franz Ferdinand, went in an open-topped car to Sarajevo and recently annexed Bosnia to open a state museum there. Bosnia had a large population of Serbs who disliked the Habsburgs, and many were affiliated with an organization called the Black Hand who wanted Bosnia to join the Kingdom of Serbia. After passing two assassins with guns and bombs who both didn't do anything, one of these nationalists attempted to bomb the car that he was in, but accidentally hit the car of officers behind him. Then, the would-be assassin attempted to kill himself by taking poison and jumping into a river, but both the river and the poison were too weak, and he was beaten by a crowd and arrested. Now that's what I call an epic. Ferdinand gave a speech before traveling to the local hospital to visit those who were injured by the first attempt on his life, and the driver just so happened to make a wrong turn and get stuck right next to one Gavrilo Princip, who was a Serbian nationalist, who shot him, and his wife. The Archduke repeatedly insisted to one of his lieutenants that it is nothing, and then promptly died. After this, everything exploded. Serbia had just expanded southwards during the Balkan War, so Austria immediately suspected that they, desiring more territory, had something to do with it, and they might have. So they got confirmation of support from Germany and then sent some impossible demands to Serbia, then declared war on them when they refused. Russia was friends with Serbia, so they declared war on Austria, then Germany declared war on Russia, and then the Russian ally, France, declared war on Germany. After Germany invaded Belgium and Luxembourg to get around France's heavily fortified border, Britain, angry about Germany's attacking neutral countries, declared war as well. The war was on. Both sides wanted to expand their fronts and find new allies. The Central Powers found new friends in Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire. The Entente had Japan. Then, there was one country in the middle of everything who wasn't doing anything. I'm talking about our good old friend, Italy. Both sides met with Italian diplomats and made promises for post-war Italian expansion. The Central Powers promised Savoy, Nice, Corsica, and Tunis if Italy were to remain neutral. The Entente promised Trent, Zara, Istria, and Trieste as well as a protectorate over Albania and a bunch of Turkish territory if they joined the war. Eventually, Italy, particularly upset that the Austrians had only consulted Germany for support and not them, joined the Entente and declared war on the Powers in 1915, opening up a vital front in the Alpine Mountains and eventually marching towards Vienna to decisively end the war and achieve glory and conquest. Actually, they gained very little ground. Fighting in the snowy Alpine Mountains was miserable and denied them the conventional trench warfare they were using on the other fronts. Fighting in mountains and across rivers always favors the defenders, allowing the Austrians to employ chemical warfare. And part of the Italian limited success despite their heavy losses can be attributed to the total incompetence of the Austrian army, who were unable to successfully invade Serbia or stop the invading Russians. The war dragged on, but by 1917 the Central Powers had wrapped up 2 of their fronts. The Bulgarian entry into the war allowed the Austrians to finally defeat Serbia, and Russia's abuses of their military and populace led to a revolution that ended their participation in the war, although they didn't actually officially surrender. As a result of these 2 fronts concluding, the Germans and Austrians suddenly had a ton of forces they could redirect to the Western Front and to Italy, and suddenly the Italian forces were on the defensive again, forced to not only retreat from the front, but further into their own territory. They continued to take losses, but managed to hold a line along the northern Italian hills and rivers. Italian forces were also there along the Western Front in France during the later stages of the war after the US joined, particularly during the Battle of the Marne. Their most decisive contribution in these later years was, however, at the Battle of Vittorio Veneto, ending the Italian front just a week before the war would end altogether. In all, 460,000 Italian soldiers, 36% of those mobilized, and 700,000 Italian civilians perished during the war. Nonetheless, with the surrender of Austria and then of Germany, the war was over and Italy was on the winner's side. So you'd assume their allies ensured they received the territory they were promised in the coming peace negotiations, right? They would get their Adriatic territories in Albania and the Anatolian lands, right? No. In what poet Gabriele D'Annunzio described it as a mutilated victory, at the conferences of Versailles and Trianon, Italy's diplomats insisted upon the boundaries asserted by the Treaty of London, but US President Woodrow Wilson figured that his so-called 14 points would be the way to go for a lasting peace. His points pushed for the dissolution of empires and self-determination for the peoples who lived there, and he considered the Treaty of London invalid. Unfortunately for Italy, many of the territories that Italy wanted were inhabited by Slavs, namely Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, and Serbia wanted to establish a unified state for the southern Slavic peoples. Britain and France also didn't see much contribution from Italy, so they didn't advocate for their gains as agreed. Primarily due to this Yugoslav movement, Italy's promised territories were cut down severely. Instead of gaining the entirety of Dalmatia, they gained only the area around Zara. Their protection over central Albania was cancelled for the continuation of an independent state in the area. Even a tiny area inhabited by an ambiguous mix of Croats and Italians, the city of Fayum, was made into a free state claimed by both sides. At the same time, Italy watched as Britain and France ignored their promises of an independent Greater Arab state and the policy of self-determination as they carved up the Middle Eastern territories held by the Ottomans at the Treaty of Sèvres, and the Americans said nothing. The last place the Italians could even vaguely recoup these losses was at Anatolia. At the very least, their promised territory was rich in resources and aligned them with other powers who also held spheres of influence there, and nobody was standing against them. However, only shortly after the Italians were even able to start occupying the area, the new revolutionary state of Turkey, led by this guy who is basically Turkish George Washington, kicked out all the colonial powers by 1923. Italy was scarred, weakened, and badly beaten, and now their people were angry. They had just lost more than 1 million people in the war and gained a fraction of their promised territory afterward. They felt they had been fighting for nothing. Radical political movements on the left began to gain traction. Then, one of these socialists started to move further right. He wanted to create an Italy that would unite all the Italian people under one flag and guide them to greatness, a nationalist movement that sought to oppose democracy and establish a dictatorship. It was immediately popular with its defeated Italian populace, and soon would overthrow the Italian government altogether. He called it fascismo.